And first, I would like to invite Ole Nielsen, who is a senior expert at Öko-Recherche. Well, for those of you who don't know Ole, he worked with the Montreal Protocol issues since 1993 from different angles. He has been a consultant, he was in sales and at the UN, and today he is giving us a global outlook on propane air conditioners and heat pumps. Welcome, Ole. Do I remember correctly that there has not been one green cooling summit without you?
This I don't know, Julika. But anyway,
Okay.
thank you for the introduction and thanks a lot for the organizers for inviting me. I'm very happy to talk about one of my favorite topics, namely the propane-based air conditioners and heat pumps of split type. So we are moving to a more mainstream product now, which is actually the split type. And that's a product where we have global sales more than 10 million per year. So we cannot, even if we would like not to use electricity, we cannot avoid it, and it will be there forever, and we need to get the best out of it. So if you can shift to the first slide. Yes, because we are a number of us, we have talked about split air conditioners with propane for many years, I think more than 15 years. And the first assembly line in the world was actually established by GIZ in China, I think in 2008 or 2009 or so. And the second one was established in India a couple of years later. And then the Multilateral Fund supported China in converting several assembly lines and compressor manufacturing lines to propane since 2011 with more than $100 million. Outside China, except I mentioned India was there, there are very few successful examples. I would say less than 5, but more failures. Failures because no one dared to take the commitment to shift fully overnight from R22 to propane, unfortunately. That was only possible in China because of the size of the enterprises. Unfortunately, as far as I know, the production in India has stopped. So the only source of propane units is now China. But China, China is obliged to report annually to the Multilateral Fund on sales. And I put on the right side the accumulated sales, which is what is being reported, and then the annual sales. I should say that for year 2022, we didn't have any numbers because of the pandemic, so that is just taken as a simple average between 21 and 23. But overall, the annual sales are not so impressive, I should say. Last year, we had the record sale of a little more than 200,000 units per year, but that's out of an installed capacity of 6 to 8 million, so not much. The positive thing is that if you look at the green curve, in the beginning there was a heavy subsidy on products, meaning that the companies, they were more or less obliged to produce from 18 to 20, which they did. And then the subsidy was slowly reduced, and now it has been reduced to much less and focused on energy efficient products. But actually, as you will see in 24, the sales have gone up dramatically by more than double. So the trend is not so bad. What we all forget about when we talk China is that in parallel, on the same assembly lines, they produced the so-called portable air conditioner with propane, which is now where propane is the industry standard, and they produce more than 3 million per year. So overall, the output of China is 3.5 million or so, which is maybe not as bad as it looks when you just see the numbers here in front of us. Next slide, please. In the very beginning, we had a number of barriers. The first one was, of course, a technical barrier because the current safety standard IEC 6335-2-40 was very restrictive, and it did only allow charges up to 200, 300 grams, depending on the room size. And that was the limiting factor, and it turned out that very few products could actually be built within this standard. And those that could be built, they were not so efficient. And the heating and cooling combined was also more complicated because that requires slightly higher charge. Then luckily, in 2022, the standard was updated with a number of safety mitigation measures that would enable charges up to almost 1 kilogram, which means that actually all the products available today, if they would be using propane, could be produced within the safety standard limits, which is great. And I think the importance of the safety standard is underestimated. And I think we should all be very thankful to the handful of people who tirelessly worked to make it happen. I will conclude, we don't have any technical barriers anymore for propane air conditioners. In terms of regulation, initially there was no really incentive to do it. And why bother with flammability when we have 410A? But then eventually Kigali Amendment was agreed upon in 2016. And the Kigali Amendment leads the way long term. As you know, with Kigali Amendment, all countries have to reduce their CO2 emission reduction by 80%, meaning that you can make a direct parallel to the global warming potential average of a country, which would be typically 300. So all the known alternatives today, in particular R32, will disappear with Kigali sooner or later. I mean, in principle, they can be used in 32 for the next 20 years, but hopefully this will go faster. But then, luckily, EU, they took the lead and they updated the F-gas regulation. It also happened recently. And the new F-gas regulation has some prohibitions, and there's among those also prohibitions on split air conditioners. And it says that after 2029, the GWP can maximum be 150 for smaller appliances. This is very soon, and that will cut out everything else but propane. I know that some of the chemical suppliers may come up with a fancy blend, but I don't really count it as a serious competitor. So I will conclude that the regulatory regime now is just in favor of introducing propane. Next slide, please. Another issue of Kigali was the high ambient, and high ambient that was, I think that delayed the Kigali Amendment for several years because these countries were looking at moving away from R22. And then they looked at what are the alternatives. For 410A32, they have a so-called low critical temperature, meaning that efficiency will be very, very poor, and they said this is simply impossible. We cannot do that. It turned out that actually industries could resolve it both with 410A and 32, also for warm countries. But even more interesting is that recently there was an attempt to purchase R290 units for a warm country in the Middle East, And I was making inquiry, do you have for warm climates? They said, no. For R290, there is no need for special products. R290 can operate under so many conditions due to its favorable parameters that we are not planning any particular products for high ambient. Normal products can work. So I would say the high ambient issue was helpful for certain countries 10 years ago, but now I think it has kind of been resolved. Next slide, please. In terms of heat pumps, split type, then the heat pump market is dominated by monoblocks. Monoblock is a self-contained unit that is typically placed outside the building, and it's a so-called air-to-water system. And so it doesn't heat up the building alone. It requires a water-based heating system. But if the water-based heating system is there, then the temperature distribution is very good, and installation is relatively easy because it only needs connection to the water and connection to electricity. You don't need to deal with any refrigerants. So that I think that is the reason that the monoblocks are so popular. But in buildings where you don't have a water-based heating system, and if you need to establish it, then it becomes a very complicated and very expensive exercise, and maybe it's not feasible to do it. So smaller buildings, older apartments, they may benefit from the split type heat pump. The split type heat pump is basically an air conditioner that runs in heating mode. And they are only coming to the market. I saw an advertisement in a Danish magazine. I put the picture on the right side. It says in Danish, available on stock. So they claim to have it on stock. So it's a small capacity split heat pump with propane. However, it requires that you understand how to deal with installation of hydrocarbon. The benefit of the air-to-air heat pump is that you have actually less heat loss in the transfer between the outside air and the inside air, because the direct air-to-air goes from outside air to the refrigerant to the inside air, whereas the monoblock goes from outside air to refrigerant to water to the inside. So it means that the operating conditions of the air-to-air heat pump is actually more favorable than the monoblock. Next slide, please. So how does the market react to all this? I mean, situation looks good, but I think the market should be somehow in panic because in EU we have only like 3 years. Then we need to see some action, serious action. And at the recent exhibition in Frankfurt, the ISA, it was a couple of months ago, the R290 ACs were on display by several companies, by 4 Chinese, which was expected, 1 Italian also expected, and then a semi-surprise 2 Japanese companies displayed the propane-based air conditioners. So one of my colleagues went around and interviewed each of them and asked them, so what are your plans for EU? Because you have actually not much time. And some of them had no plans of market introduction, or if they had some ideas, it would be very, very modest numbers that they would bring to the market in next years, which is for me a big surprise, and that brings me to my last barrier, which I think still exists, and I would like to disagree with some of the other participants. that we heard yesterday, that these products are not just out there. We cannot get them. I mean, no matter how much you want, you cannot buy them. So I conclude that there has been so much talking and talking and talking, but there is no action from the manufacturer side. I think the supply side is really a huge problem. And my last slide, please. Next one. So why is it so that they don't sell it? Because they have mastered the technology for so many years. Is it because they are afraid of accidents? I think not, because the risk assessments have been done and shown that the products are very, very safe. Maybe it's because, this is just my own brainstorming, maybe it's because they are hesitant to be the first one on the market. But this is also not an argument, because usually if you are the first one to come with good ideas, then you will win money on it. Third, I thought was, maybe it's too expensive. I mean, they haven't reached more than just batch production in China, and obviously that's more costly than regular production. But I think the next speaker, he will talk about the difficulties to buy them, and even if they were willing to pay 3 or 4 times the average cost, they couldn't buy it. So I think the cost cannot be the factor. Then it was claimed from China that well, the effectiveness of installation is lower with propane, because the technicians, they have to be more careful about the safety procedures and So they can install more Fortinet than propane within a day, and then they will not install propane. That is maybe a point, but the only way to overcome it is actually to learn how to do the installation more effective, and then maybe you don't need to be so careful about everything as you thought from the very beginning. So I think that's just a matter of getting used to it. So no really good explanation other than one. And the one explanation I can come up with is that it's a matter of company priority. It's not their priority to sell them now. They want to focus on other things, on design, or I can put it more rudely, that they want to milk the cow with R32 as long as they can, and only when they cannot do that anymore, then they can bring their R290 products in the market. I think this is a very unfair approach that leaves many countries in difficulties. We heard yesterday that some countries, they wish to introduce early bans on HFC-based air conditioners, but how can they do it if they cannot get any alternatives? So, if the supply side is hesitant to support all this, it will not happen. I mean, I wonder how can Europe deal with I'm almost done, Julika.
Thank you.
How can Europe deal with the transition if it comes only the last year? I mean, the people are already screaming that there is not enough educated personnel to do installation. So I think this is a very bad situation, and I'm working on finding a solution. And if some of you are interested, drop me an email in a couple of months. I think I will have news for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ole, for your thought-provoking input. And you know the deal by now. Please write your questions in the chat or raise your hand. And at the end of this session, we will move on to our Q&A section. Thank you, Ole, once again, and see you later. And let's invite Mustafa Abunofal to our virtual stage. He's a senior consultant at Guidehouse and technical expert of the CoolUp program. And he's going to talk about scaling of natural refrigerant cooling to combat extreme heat. Welcome, Mustafa. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Ulika. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to also extend my thanks to the organizers for such an interesting and important event for a topic that's really gaining much more momentum and is becoming really an integral part of our lives for sure. And I'd like to also thank you for inviting us to present a little bit more about the CoolUp program and what we're really trying to do to move forward with the upscaling of sustainable cooling technologies in the countries. And and how we really push the narrative of natural refrigerants, specifically in a critical region. So yeah, can we have the slides on? Perfect. Perfect. So maybe a quick introduction first to the CoolUp program. So the CoolUp program really is a program that aims to promote sustainable cooling in the MENA region and Turkey. And it's really focusing on the upscale of those sustainable cooling technologies and to drive down the overall cooling demand and also help those countries in fulfilling their international and national climate obligations when it comes to the cooling and refrigeration sectors. The CoolUp program is part of the International Climate Initiative, IKI, and is funded by the federal government, by the German federal government. So our approach is really built on 4 key areas. The main topic or the main point is to reduce the overall cooling demand through the use of sustainable cooling technologies and to support the phase down of hydrofluorocarbons by introducing natural refrigerants, ultimately hoping to phase out of HFCs in the targeted countries. Now, here, of course, we're also working on an area that is kind of sometimes overlooked, which is there's a lot of inefficient technologies in the market. So we're also trying to push for the proper replacement of those technologies and similarly the already used refrigerants as well. There's still continued use of HCFCs in those countries, and we're hoping to push the narrative of natural refrigerants to really kind of take them out of the market. And lastly, of course, we're working on the aspect of training and raising the awareness across the different layers of society. The CoolUp Consortium has a really large set of experts from international playground, but also we have local actors. We have international experts on the technical side like Öko-Recherche and ILK Dresden. On the policy and finance side, we have Frankfurt School and UNDP, and we have local experts in each of the countries that bring in their expertise, but also help us to implement the project on the ground. Next slide, please. So just quick, I'll keep it short here, just an overview of why we chose the MENA region. Well, first of all, it's one of the focus countries for the IKI, International Climate Initiative, but also the MENA region and Turkey are really at a critical stage at this point, because I'm assuming all of us here in the call are firm believers of climate change. We're already witnessing firsthand the impacts of rising temperatures, and this region is at a higher risk of increasing temperature. It's actually warming up at twice the global average rate, which kind of is really contributing directly to the increased demand in AC products. So the overall increased demand for AC systems in this region is expected to almost increase by 3-fold by 2050 compared to 2020 levels. This is definitely, of course, coupled with an increase in overall energy demand resulting from cooling, and it's expected up to 50% by 2040. There's several challenges this region is facing, of course, but it's also positioned in a spot to really drive the sustainable cooling change globally, not just within this region, as it is a large market. Definitely, there's lots of opportunities for the technologies to come in and create some sort of a revolution in changing the conventional type of cooling equipment, but also refrigeration equipments. Now, of course, it can also serve as a perfect example to really develop those financial products and mechanisms that can make those technologies even more affordable and accessible to the different layers of society. Next slide, please. just quickly to highlight one case study or a quick example, basically Jordan. So Jordan is also one of the focus countries of the COOLUP program, but it's also facing the same issues as the overall region. The temperature is rising rapidly. If we look at the past, let's say, few decades, the temperature has been rising in Jordan by almost 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. It has increased since 1960 till 2020 roughly by 2.3 degrees Celsius on average annual temperatures. This is already reflected in the increasing AC demand in the country. So it is expected to increase by at least threefold by 2050 compared to 2020 levels, coupled, of course, by increasing electricity demand. I mean, I can give a quick example on how the situation is actually developing. So last year I was talking to my mom specifically in the summer, and she was saying, oh, okay, it's been really hot. It's always over 40 degrees. It's time to get an AC. So we can even experience this firsthand that it's already happening. People are starting to really go towards more AC systems because generally passive approaches for the are not really being sufficient to counter the increasing heat and temperature. But there is also here we have a major opportunity that we can work on, and this is the core of the COOLUP program, is the promotion of natural refrigerants. When we look at the emissions in 2020, roughly, I mean, 62% are resulting from indirect emissions. Direct emissions are still not that prominent, but moving forward in the future, direct emissions resulting from refrigerant leakage and operation and disposal are becoming much more prominent. More than 2/3 of the overall emissions will be resulting from those direct emissions. And this is where we have an actual opportunity to really phase out those HFC refrigerants and drop this to zero, virtually zero, once we actually use natural refrigerants. Next slide, please. So as part of our project activities in general, we need to obviously start this change. So what we're doing, we have something called, we call it demonstration projects, but the aim is really to implement those sustainable cooling technologies in the countries in the different sectors. So when looking at Jordan, for example, AC sector is going to contribute by far to the most, it's going to witness the most growth. It's going to contribute the most to the electricity consumption and even for emissions. So out of the different projects that we're trying to implement is we're trying to change the conventional AC system technology in a specific site from the usage of HFC R410A to an R290 propane. The main benefit is really the huge saving potential in emissions. Virtually, propane has almost almost non-existent global warming potential compared to R410A. And once we actually look at the technologies for AC systems, of course, we'll come now in a second to the challenges, but generally they are comparable of comparable efficiency and even sometimes higher efficiency than conventional systems. This applies for AC split units. And another example, what we're doing is basically an air handling unit, and we're also trying to get rid of the HCFC refrigerant that's already on the ground, R222, to also switch it with R290. And this project is currently operational. We're monitoring the results and hoping to kind of present some sort of results that convey the trust in the technology later on by around this time next year, hopefully. But yes, as Ole mentioned, we face several challenges in those technologies. While we look around and we see, okay, there's actually some companies that have those products, but it was extremely difficult at some point to procure those split units to be installed in Jordan at this point. Namely, and yes, as Ole said, the prices were quite high. We were still willing to do that because we still wanted to, we firmly believe that we need to demonstrate that this technology is functional. There's a lot of savings to be had, and it's going to contribute properly to the sustainable cooling transition within those countries. But again, we faced this challenge, and it kind of pushed our timeline slightly back. And another challenge is also, even if you want to look inside the countries or inside the region, some of the countries do not have local production capacity for such technologies. And even if they had some of that, it's generally in the R&D phase, or it's really not commercially viable at this point. And so it cannot really serve the local market. There's also, of course, it's a new technology, flammability aspect. There's still lack of technical trained technicians within those countries in general, even globally, if you want to look at it. And there's, of course, the high initial investment cost. Now, if it's still kind of somewhat comparable when it comes to AC split units, but other technologies, once we go to larger sizes like air handling units, chillers, etc., it's still a bit more expensive to go for an R290 solution. But again, there's several potentials that we can do. So what can we do? Next slide, please. So for us at the Cool-Up program, we obviously believe that just changing 2, 3, 10, 15, 20, 100 systems is not going to be sufficient to really create an actual sustainable cooling change within those countries. That's why the Cool-Up program has a holistic approach across the overall value chain, focusing on the several different thematic areas. So what we try to do is we're working hand in hand with the several stakeholders on the policy side, financial side, technology providers, and even capacity building and trainings, and also awareness. So in terms of policy, for example, we're working hand in hand with the policy makers and regulators to either develop national cooling action plans and kind of tailor them to include natural refrigerants as part of the core and key transition goals in the future, and how can we really kind of create a sustainable change, or at least an enabling environment for natural refrigerants and sustainable cooling technologies to become really more prominent in those countries. There's a lot of other policy activities also ongoing, like the development update of existing NEAP, National Energy Efficiency Action Plans, for those AC systems, be it on the residential or commercial side, and several other activities for policy. But also we're working hand in hand with banks and financial institutions in those countries to work on financial mechanisms that could support the uptake of those specific suitable technologies for the context of these countries in general. There has been several publications on both policy and financial side with feasibility studies as well, kind of highlighting, okay, which technologies are most suitable for the context of this country, and how what's the expected payback period, and so on. So just to really create a bit more trust with the end users, but also to kind of enable the banks to be capable, or at least they themselves have trust in this technology to be able to finance it as well. On the technology side and demonstrations, as you said, we are really working on having several projects across those countries to showcase that those technologies work. Lots of savings are possible. They are suitable for these climates as well. And in addition to that, of course, we don't only work on the AC side, but we're also working on the commercial refrigeration. We have several other projects that are focused purely on highlighting that natural refrigerants are working properly within the commercial refrigeration sector. And lastly, we in terms of capacity building and training. So what we did as a starter, we kind of hosted several trainings for the trainers in those countries to be able to handle those natural refrigerant equipment, the refrigerants themselves, and how to do maintenance, etc. These trainers are now replicating those trainings to several technicians across the countries to really kind of create a local sustainable kind of situation where we do not have to rely every time on the international manufacturer to provide technical support and maintenance activities in general. In addition to that, some of the countries are also getting some sort of a training curricula that we're trying to implement it also with the university programs, where there will have, so some university programs have dual learning, so it's good to introduce natural refrigerants as well in theory and practice, to have really ready to market graduates in the future as well. And lastly, we're working definitely on the outreach, and we have several publications, snapshots to the tailored directly to the end users, but also to the technology providers, financial institutes, policymakers, to really kind of raise awareness, increase the appetite for natural refrigerants. So just to conclude, Cool-Up is really kind of serves as a platform for the various stakeholders across the different thematic areas to really come together to hope to drive the sustainable cooling forward and ensure that natural refrigerants become the mainstream refrigerant in the future, because we firmly believe that the future is natural, and this is our mission as a Cooler program. We're trying to push towards that. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to conclude my presentation, and I'd really invite you all to visit our website and have a look at the several publications that we have there and the different snapshots, and to stay in touch with the different projects that we have, and also to stay in touch, stay tuned for the upcoming monitoring results of our different demonstration projects, where we highlight the efficiency of those different technologies and equipment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. Let's see some reactions in the chat, and maybe you want to applaud and send some hearts. I saw them during your presentation already. Thank you, Mustafa, for your presentation, and I would like Ole to rejoin so we could enter into our Q&A session. And if you want to ask a question directly in live, just show me your hand, raise your hand, and then I will put you on. Let's take a look at the chat. Okay, we are going to start with you, Ole. And there's the question: should countries induce production of R290 units through consumption? They will not migrate to R290 by simple decision. That's why they married to R32, even if it is a very short-lived marriage. So, Ole, your take on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I mean, I understand that it can only be a short-lived marriage with R32. This is very clear to me. But I think I understand that the question is, should countries establish production by themselves of R32 units? I think this is, of course, a nice thought, but I think it's a very difficult thought, because the AC market is dominated by very, very big players, like seriously big players. And if you come as a small player in country X, then your chances are not overly good to be successful. And obviously it also costs a bit of money to establish a production with propane. Propane is a bit more expensive to implement than HFCs in production. So I think it's a nice thought, but I'm not sure it's realistic, unfortunately.
All right. Maybe
I think what countries can do, I mean, they can give. I mean, I would love to say they should prohibit HFC, but I know they cannot. But at least they can give incentives or tax incentives to non-HFCs.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be a way forward until hopefully the supply situation will improve.
Yes.
But like new establishment, I think this is difficult.
Right. Maybe in a moment we can take a look at the demand side. So how can the demand be increased, right? I want to read out a comment exactly referring to that. I think if we could hold contractors responsible for installing HFO, HFC fluids, accountable for the pollution they create when leaking, it will change. We cannot afford to keep them out of the accountability. The chemical companies don't care about the litigations they are in. The money they have to pay is not high enough. So maybe we can just, because we don't have too much time left, so maybe we can just talk a little bit about how to increase the demand before we move on to the next question.
I think the demand is already there. It's just that you cannot, the supply is not there. I mean, I know that here I said you have also purchased split units, and it was not easy to close the deal. And even with a closed deal, you are not 100% certain that the supplier will actually fulfill the deal, if I'm not mistaken. So I think demand is there, and if someone would try to push the demand a bit, then it would really grow. But if you cannot buy it, then it's like just talking.
Yeah.
And I have to apologize because I saw from Bernhard that Godrich has not stopped. I'm happy.
Yeah, thank you.
I just thought so, and I heard so, and I saw that Godrich stopped several years to import compressors, and I thought now that then probably they stopped it because they're also not so active. I mean, Mustafa didn't say it, but when they did the tender for Jordan, they invited all the known manufacturers personally, right? And answers were zero. No one bothered to answer. And then the only option to buy is to buy through very complicated chain of companies and someone who managed to get units from somewhere, or Alibaba shopping, or I don't know what. So the real suppliers are not present. They're only
Let me read
present
out.
at exhibitions.
Let me read out another question. Do you have information? How much is the market of the R290 and maybe in percentage the current natural refrigeration used in the world?
Oh, I don't have any numbers. But the market for split air conditioners, for example, it's not very different from what I've shown on the graphs. I think the sales of Godrich in India, they compare to the accumulated sales in China, but that's all. So we talk about 500,000 maximum out of, as I said, more than 10 million per year. But there is one hidden thing in all this, and I didn't say it in my presentation, but I learned that for China, they only report on companies that have been actually supported by the multilateral fund. And the multilateral fund has something they call eligibility criteria. And some companies are not eligible. Not eligible maybe because they were established after the decision on HCFCs were taken, or etc., etc. So there are non-eligible companies in China, but actually I'm aware of one company who did establish a production line by themselves with their own funds. And they are selling 15,000 units to Australia and Southeast Asia every year.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just a hidden number that we don't know. And I tried to figure out or find out whether there are more of these companies. I couldn't, but I think there should be.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to close this session with a question to you, Mustafa. And so, Mustafa, I know that IKI focus countries and that you're working with the MENA region, but maybe, well, I would like to know which country would you consider a front runner and what do they do differently?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. And there is no actually straightforward answer because they are really at different stages when it comes to each of the thematic areas. So for example, if you want to look at Jordan, the local manufacturing for commercial refrigeration, not AC, has already moved beyond HFCs. They no longer produce any standalone refrigerators, etc. with HFCs. They moved on with completely natural refrigerants since a very long time. And they're also front runners when it comes to technology. I mean, they're also producing CO2 cold rooms, different units locally within the country. So that's already a huge step Jordan in general. But if you want to also look at in terms of policy work, like Lebanon had their already a national cooling action plan since a few years already, where all the other countries are just starting with their national cooling action plans and moving forward. Same thing, I mean, for the readiness of the financial sector, there's a bit more opportunities in Jordan and Turkey than the other countries, for example, at this point. But yeah, so there is really no direct answer. They're all at a different stage at each of those thematic areas. And what we're working on is really to push them all towards the same level, or at least to be a bit more focused on pushing this sustainable cooling. So yeah.
Thank you very much for that answer. And thank you once again, Ole Nielsen and Mustafa Abunofal, for this session.